Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on creating amazing PowerPoint presentations, where we're going to be utilizing all of the tools and features in PowerPoint, specifically some of the newer tools and features that you may not have used before, to create some really engaging, nice-looking PowerPoint slide decks. And my aim really in this session is just really to change the way you think about PowerPoint. So we're aiming to get away from that very kind of standard PowerPointy look to creating a more fluid, visual, animated slide deck that's really engaging for your audience. Now, it's a pleasure to have you all with us this afternoon. Normally I am joined on these webinars by the lovely Mr. Adam Lacey, but unfortunately he is away this week in Florida, so you've just got me. But what that means is that I won't be able to monitor that chat panel throughout this webinar. So if you do have any questions, then please note them down and I'll leave some time at the end to answer any questions that you might have. Now, for those of you who are new to our webinars, I'll just briefly introduce myself. So my name's Deb Ashby and I'm an IT trainer and Microsoft subject matter expert. And what that basically means is that I design, deliver and facilitate Microsoft training courses, both in the classroom and online, such as this. And I've been doing this for a pretty long time, about 11 years in IT training and roughly 24 years in the IT industry, which sounds like a really long time and makes me feel very old when I think about it. I've trained thousands of people over the course of my career all across the world, and I've worked in-house at large corporations, small companies, and everything in between. So hopefully that qualifies me to be sitting in front of you and teaching you today. Now, what we're going to do in this session is we are actually going to go into a presentation that I've part created, and we're going to finish it off. And as we're finishing off that presentation, I'm going to show you loads of tools and techniques that you might not be familiar with, loads of tips and tricks, and also some really useful keyboard shortcuts, which will help you work more efficiently in PowerPoint. But before we get onto that, I really just want to highlight some specific golden rules when it comes to creating PowerPoint presentations. So the first golden rule would be to avoid busy slides. Now, you'll see this fairly often. People tend to think that they need to cram as much as possible onto each and every slide. And it really goes against what the whole point of PowerPoint is. Now, the thing with PowerPoint that often gets overlooked is that you don't need to be putting everything that you're saying onto your slide. PowerPoint should just be there to really enhance whatever it is that you're talking about as the speaker. So there's been many presentations that I've sat through where I have a load of text on a slide in front of me and the speaker is basically just saying what's on that slide, and that really isn't the point. It would be much better if they had some kind of visual or just some brief bullet points and then they themselves can elaborate on those points. You'll find that if you have an audience, it's very difficult for them to read lots of text on a slide and listen to you at the same time. So avoiding busy slides would be my first key point. I'm just going to show you a very brief example. So something like this. Now, we have a lot of things going wrong on this particular slide. The first thing you'll notice is that that image of the planets is very stretched. Those planets are kind of an oval shape as opposed to round as they're supposed to be. And that's really just for incorrect use of an image in a slide. And what generally tends to happen is that when people put an image into a slide, if it doesn't quite fit, people will try to use the handles on the image to drag it out so that it fits their slide size. And invariably that makes the image distort and not look particularly professional. So a tip that you're going to see over and over again in this presentation today is how you can avoid distorting images that you use in your presentations. Now, aside from that image, we have some labels, we have some text, which is pretty small, and then we have some stats contained within a table. And this is just a really busy looking slide. The text isn't particularly big, so it might be hard for people who are at the back of the room to read, and there's just a lot going on this slide. So a better way of doing something like this is, if I wanted to talk about the planets, would be to just have one high quality image of the planets and then I can elaborate on this topic. And it means that my audience is able to look at a nice image so they get a visual in their mind, but also listen to what I'm talking about without being distracted by lots of text which they need to read. I might then put the stats onto a separate slide. So don't be afraid if you have a lot of information, you don't have to cram it all onto one slide. You can split it up across different slides. Another thing that you might be surprised by is don't use bullet points. And this is something which I think is ingrained in all of us. If we're writing some kind of list, we will immediately reach for our bullet points or our numbered lists. And what I've been noticing over the past few years is that many of the large tech companies, so people like Apple and Microsoft, don't tend to use bullets in their slides. And I think that's because they are a little bit old school when you look at them. If you do your bullet points without the actual bullet point, it does look a lot more modern and a lot cleaner. So again, we could have something like this, which has bullet points, and we could transform it into something like that. So I've added a background picture, I've used some transparencies, and we don't have any bullet points in there. And I know that for my own personal use, for the last 3 years or so, I very rarely use bullet points in any of my PowerPoint presentations. So I just think it looks a lot cleaner and a lot more professional. The next golden rule is the rule of 6, and this really relates to how much text you're putting on your slides. So there is a general rule that if you're doing some kind of point, that you make it 6 words or less. Remember, you don't need to type everything you're going to say onto the slide. It doesn't have to be detailed. It's really there just to highlight the main point that you're trying to make, and then you as the speaker can elaborate on that particular point. So bear that in mind as well, the rule of 6. Pick large fonts. Now again, this is a good one. If you're presenting to a large room of people, you need to make sure that everybody in that room, no matter where they're seated, can read clearly everything that you have on your slide. And bear in mind that we're trying to cut down the amount of text that we're adding to our slides. That will essentially allow you to pick larger fonts. And my recommendation to people is not to go less than 24 points on your slide. This is somewhat personal preference, but in general, that's the rule that I try to stick to. This is a big one, avoiding excessive animation. I always find, particularly with people who are fairly new to PowerPoint, who have maybe just learned how to do animation, they get a little bit carried away with it in the first presentations that they create. And we have lots of animation applied to one slide, and it starts to look a bit chaotic, a bit crazy, and again, not particularly professional. So animation is really good. It can enhance your presentations dramatically, but you should use it sparingly. And just be mindful. So I always like to say to myself when I'm thinking about using animation, is this piece of animation going to enhance or detract from my presentation? And I'll give you a quick example of something that definitely detracts. We have a title flying in, we have an image scrolling up, and then we have some little points, and they're all kind of coming in from different angles. I basically have a different piece of animation applied to each one of these, and it just doesn't look consistent and it doesn't look professional. So I try to keep animation to a minimum and just make sure that it does enhance my presentation and not distract. Using visuals instead of text. This is a big one for me. I am a huge fan of using very large images on my slides, and wherever possible I like to use images instead of text. It's very well known that the human brain remembers visuals over text. So if you're trying to make a key point, having a really effective image there as opposed to a paragraph of text explaining it will make people remember it more. And an example I always use is something like this, which on the face of it isn't a particularly nice image. It's quite shocking. It cuts through the noise. And I might use this slide when I'm talking about PowerPoint and the pitfalls of PowerPoint. But I guarantee, as shocking as this image might be, that when those people leave that presentation, if there's one thing that they remember from this presentation, it's going to be this image. And in turn, whatever I was talking about when this image was on the screen. So again, don't be afraid to use large images to illustrate your point. Using high contrast colors. Now this is really important with regards to readability, and I think most of us will probably see this as common sense. You don't want to put text onto a slide where the font color blends into the background. You want to make sure you have good contrast between the text and the background color so that everybody can read exactly what is on that slide. Now, a looping introduction is something I like to add into my presentations at the beginning. And what a looping introduction is basically a series of slides, and it can be as many as you like, which loop round automatically and display various pieces of information. So the way that I use looping introductions is that if I'm running a training session and I'm waiting for all of my delegates to arrive, instead of just having a slide with the title of the course on the background behind me, I would rather have a looping set of slides, which are a lot more interesting for people to look at. So as people are arriving, I want them to have something interesting to look at while we're waiting for the class to become full. So I might have a looping introduction which contains an inspirational quote, or my contact details, or possibly a question for them to think about, or some kind of image for them to look at. And I can have this scrolling round over and over again whilst the delegates are arriving, and then once everybody's there, I can switch off that introduction and carry on with my presentation. So looping introductions are a really nice way to add interest at the beginning of your presentation. Design for your audience, a really important point. Always bear in mind who is going to be viewing your PowerPoint presentation, because that will essentially determine the style of your presentation. So for example, if I'm designing a presentation that's going to be presented to CEOs and business leaders, that would probably be a lot more professional and a lot more business-like than a presentation I might design for a club that I attend in the evenings after work. You know, it might be fine for me to use something like Comic Sans font for my presentation to my club, but I definitely don't want to use that font in my business presentation. So bear in mind who's viewing and design for your audience. So those are some very general tips when it comes to designing PowerPoint. What I want to do now is to jump into a presentation that I have half completed. I'm going to show you some of the things that I've already done, and then we're going to jump in and we're going to finish off that presentation, and hopefully I'll get to show you some really cool keyboard shortcuts for efficiency and some new tools, features and facilities that you're not aware of in PowerPoint as well, which is really going to boost your ability to create some really engaging presentations. So let's jump across to that presentation. So here we are in the presentation, and just so you get an idea of what we're doing here, this is a presentation for a candle company. So this candle company sells candles from many different brands. And this presentation highlights some of their best-selling candles and also their order process and things like that. So you can see here, these first three slides are all kind of showcasing specific candles, and you can see that they're really nicely designed. We have a picture in the background, we have a transparency, we have some text in there, and I've also utilized some shapes. And the next one is of similar appearance, but we just have different transparencies running across here, so on and so forth. So we're going to create another one of these slides in a moment, but the first thing I want to do is create a title slide for this presentation. So I'm going to click on slide 1 in the pane on the left-hand side. I'm going to go up to my home ribbon, and in this slides group you see I have a new slide drop down. Now this is where you'll come to add a new slide into your presentation, and the options that you get underneath relate to the layout of your slide. So if you kind of know what you want to put on your slide, then you might be able to choose a layout that's relevant to that. A lot of the time when I'm designing, I kind of start a slide and I'm not really sure where it's going to go. I don't really know until I start adding images and moving things around. So often I will just start with a blank slide, which is what I'm going to do in this case. And there we go. Now you'll see it's added it as slide 2, and I want this to be slide 1. So again, in that left-hand pane, I'm just going to select the slide, I'm going to drag it and move it above slide 1. So this is going to be my title slide, and what I want is a nice big image in the background that fills up this entire slide. Now when it comes to using imagery in your PowerPoint presentations, you have to be a little bit careful. So you can't just jump onto Google, search for what you want and then use that in your presentation, particularly if this presentation is going to be used for commercial reasons. Most images have some kind of copyright attached to them. So really, when you're designing PowerPoint presentations, you want to make sure that the images you use are free from copyright. And there are a couple of sites that have a really nice selection of free images for you to use in your presentations, and I'm going to show you those a little bit later on. However, I'm going to show you another way that you can do this. I'm going to go up to the Insert ribbon, and I'm going to go to Online Pictures. So what this will allow me to do is search online in Bing, which is Microsoft's internet browser. And you can see I have a whole ton of categories down here of images that I can use. Alternatively, I can search for an image. So I'm going to say candles. Now with these images, you'll see underneath we have this little box ticked. It says Creative Commons only. Now a Creative Commons license means that these images are free for you to use in your presentation. So I know that the images listed in here, as long as I've got that ticked, are okay for me to use. So I'm going to scroll through this list and I'm going to find a nice image that I want to use. And I think this one looks pretty good for my cover slide. So I'm going to select it and click on Insert. And there we go. Now you'll see it's brought across a little accreditation here. It says this photo is by an unknown author and is licensed under CC BY-ND. And if you hold down your control key and click on this just to make sure, it will open up a web browser, and I can see here it says you are free to share, copy and redistribute the material in any medium or format for any purpose, even commercially. So I know that I am fine to use that image in my presentation. So once I know that, this accreditation is actually just a text box, so I'm going to delete that out, and I'm left with my image. Now currently this image doesn't take up all of my slide. And this is where we get people dragging these handles out and completely stretching this image, which is not what we want to do. There is a much better way of doing this. Let's click on the image. And once we've clicked on this image, we now have our picture format ribbon available. So let's jump up to there. And in this end group where we have size, if we click the lower half of the crop button, you'll see we have an option for fill. Now when we click fill, we get these little black handles around the outside of the image, and all you need to do is drag those handles out to fill the size of the slide. So I'm going to drag this one up, that one across, and this one down. So I've now set that fill area. I'm going to go back to my crop button and I'm going to tell PowerPoint fill this area. So let's click fill again. And there we go. So it kind of zooms in on the image, which means that it's not going to distort. Now once I'm happy with that, and I can move this around a little bit to show more or less of the picture, so I'm just going to move that down. And once I'm happy with it, I then just click on crop again. And now I have a perfectly resized image that isn't distorted but takes up my entire slide background. So now I have my image on my title slide. I'm probably going to want to add some kind of title on there. Now I could jump up to the Insert ribbon and insert a text box, that's absolutely fine, but I find myself jumping to Home and going to this Layout drop down and just selecting Title Only, because that gives me a text box like so. And I'm going to type in the name of the candle company. So we have Croydon Candle Company. Now I'm going to change this text to white. Now another important thing to remember is that when you're typing in boxes like this, these boxes are called placeholders. So if I highlight the placeholder or select the placeholder, go up to my font formatting options and select white for the text, it's going to change the text. I didn't necessarily have to come in and highlight that text, I just needed to click the placeholder that was holding that text. What I'm also going to do is increase the size of this font by using my increase font size button. I'm going to make that reasonably large and I'm going to align it to the center using my center align tool. Now that doesn't look too bad, but because the image in the background is rather busy and contains lots of different colors, the title doesn't really stand out too much. So there's a few things I could do here. And one thing that I find myself doing fairly often is using transparencies. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to go up to the Insert ribbon and I'm going to select a shape and I'm going to use the Rectangle Shape tool. And I'm going to draw a rectangle just down here about that big. Now, I don't want my rectangle to be blue, I actually want it to be black. So I'm going to jump up to my shape format ribbon, and the quickest thing for me to do here is go to my shape styles and select the first one here, which is black. I also want to make sure I have no outline on my shape. So I'm going to say no outline. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the transparency on this shape so that I can see some of the background peeking through. Now to do that, right click on the shape, go down to Format Shape, and you'll see in this Fill section you have a transparency slider. And you'll see as I drag that up and down, it lets either less or more of that background picture through. So I'm going to put mine about there and click on Close. So now what I might do is move my transparent shape over my title, and I might want to resize it very slightly, like so. Now, because I've put that transparency on top of the text, the way that you need to think about PowerPoint is that it works in layers. So the bottom layer is the image, the next layer we have the text, and then the layer that's currently at the front is that transparent rectangle. Now I actually want the text to be in front of that rectangle, and what you'll find is it's quite hard once you start layering objects on top of each other to select the text behind the rectangle. So a way that you can get around that is by using the selection pane. And again, we're on the shape format ribbon, you'll see it just here in the Arrange group selection pane. This will essentially list all of the objects that you have on the current slide, and it gives them default names. Now what I like to do is make these more meaningful so that I can identify them a lot easier. So I'm going to name this rectangle. I'm going to say rectangle tint. The title I'm going to call title text. And then the picture, candle, background. So they are now a lot easier for me to identify. So now I have my different objects listed here, I can change the order in which they show. So I essentially want the title text to be showing in front of the rectangle tint. So all I need to do is click title text and drag it above rectangle tint. And when I let go, you can see it brings it to the front. So it's a really nice way of being able to organize the layers or the objects on your individual slides. So in that one slide, we've learned quite a few new techniques. We've seen how to insert pictures, utilize that crop and fill utility to fill the slide size. We've added some text by changing the layout to a title only. We've added a shape and we've adjusted the transparency, and we've looked at how you can reorder different layers. Now we're going to come back to this title slide in a moment, but I want to do some work on some of the other slides in my presentation first. So let's jump to this second slide. And you can see the following three, so slides 2, 3 and 4, are all really showcasing specific candles. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add another one, and I'm going to show you how I designed this because it's so quick and simple, you're going to be amazed. Now the first thing I want to do is add a new slide, so up to our new slide drop down. And I'm going to select title only. And again, it's put it in as slide 3. I want this one to be the first one in the list, so I'm going to pull it above slide 2, like so. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add the image that I want to utilize in this slide. Now this is an image that I have saved off to my hard drive, so I'm going to go to Insert, and this time I'm going to go to Pictures. So all you need to do is browse to wherever you have your image saved, and I'm going to select this one here, Tea Lights, and click Insert. And again, this is an image that is free to use, so I know I'm not violating any copyright. And what you'll also see again is that we have this white space down the side, so we need to do our crop and fill trick again. So click on the image, go up to crop and select fill. Grab your handles and drag them out to fill that white space. Once you've got that set, you want to tell PowerPoint to fill that space, so fill again. And once you're happy with that, just click crop to accept it. And there we go. So simple to do. So now I have this image, but I want to have something which looks like this. Now I could jump in and I could recreate this using shapes. So I could do a rectangle shape, color it black, another one, color it blue, do another one, make it grey, adjust the transparency, so on and so forth. I could go through and do all of that. And I probably would end up with something which looks pretty similar to this. However, an easier way of doing this is to click on your slide, and you'll see that PowerPoint has some inbuilt slide ideas based on what you have in your slide. Now you'll find design ideas in a couple of different places. You'll find them on the home ribbon, and it's the very last command you can see here, design ideas. And you'll also find it on the design ribbon, again right at the end we have design ideas. And this will open a pane, and PowerPoint will generate some slide layouts based on what you currently have in your slide. And you can see I get quite a few of them in here which I could utilize if I wanted to. So I'm going to use this one again, I'm going to select it. And there we go. So I've managed to do all of that in just one click. And I can then go in and add my title text. So I have my text in there and it's just in a text box. Now I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so it's easier to manage. And I'm going to move this text box up. Now again, I could drag it up, but I want to keep it in line. So I'm going to use my arrow keys. So remember, you can always use your arrow keys to move around objects on your page. And arrow keys are particularly useful if you just want to make very slight corrections to the position of your object. It's a lot easier sometimes using arrow keys than actually utilizing your mouse. So now what I want to add is just a description of these tea lights. So I'm going to go to the insert ribbon, I'm going to select text box, and I'm going to draw a quick text box and add some text. So there we go, I've added my text. I'm going to do some formatting. So again, I'm going to click on the placeholder up to my font formatting options, and I'm going to make that text white. And I'm going to move that down very slightly. So let's jump to our other slide and see what else we need to add in. Now you can see underneath the name of the candle, I have a rating system, and I have 5 stars here, and one of those stars has no fill, so it's telling me this is a 4 out of 5 star rated candle. Now these are very simple to recreate, they're just shapes. So let me show you how you can do this. Let's go back to our slide. I'm going to jump up to insert, and we're going to go to shapes. And right at the bottom we have a group called stars and banners, and the one I want to use is this one here, which is the 5-pointed star. So I have my little crosshair, which means I'm ready to draw my shape. Now I don't want a distorted star when I'm drawing it. I want the aspect ratio to remain consistent. So in order to do that, when I drag, I need to hold down my shift key, and it ensures I'm going to get a perfectly consistent star. So now what I want to do is I want to duplicate this star 4 more times. Now before I duplicate, I want to apply any formatting to this star first. So again, if we check back on our second slide, these stars are in yellow. So what I want to do is make sure that I change this star to yellow first before I duplicate it. Otherwise, I'm just going to have to do it 5 times afterwards. So I'm going to select my star, I'm going to go up to shape format, and I'm going to change the shape fill to yellow, and I'm going to turn off any outline around the outside. And now I'm going to duplicate this star 4 more times, and the shortcut key for duplicating objects is Control D. So let's do Control D, 1, 2, 3, 4, which gives me my 5 stars. So now with these stars, I want to make sure that they're all lined up perfectly. Now I could try and do that myself just by eye, but to be honest with you, that invariably goes very horribly wrong and I never get it quite right. So this is where I like to utilize my alignment tools. So I'm going to select all of my stars. So I'm going to click the first one, hold down Shift, and click the rest. Up to my shape format ribbon, and in the arrange group we have some alignment options. So I'm going to say align to middle. I'm then going to say distribute horizontally, which means they will be evenly spaced. And there I have my 5 yellow stars. Now I want to move these around a little bit. They're not quite lined up correctly. So what I want to do is, instead of moving them all individually and messing up that alignment, the easiest thing to do is select them all and then group them together so they become one object for you to move. And the shortcut key for grouping objects together is Control G. So this now makes it a lot easier to move them all as a group, and I'm just using my arrow keys to position them. I'm going to move them across a little bit, like so. Now if you remember, on the other slide we had one that had no fill, so this is a 4-star candle. So I'm going to say that these tea lights are currently rated 3 stars. So what I want to do is remove the fill from these last 2 stars. If you remember, I have these grouped together. Now I want to work on the individual stars on the end, so I want to ungroup them all by doing Control Shift G. Now I can select the 2 stars on the end. I'm going to go up to shape format and I'm going to remove the fill. So I'm going to say no fill. And you'll see essentially that makes them invisible. So what we want to do is just have the outline. So I need to add a shape outline in white to give the desired effect. So very quickly we've been able to build up a slide that looks really effective, really engaging and really interesting using some really simple techniques. Another thing I might want to add onto here is you can see I have this little bestseller thing, and again that is just a shape, so we'll very quickly do that. We'll go to our shapes. I'm going to select my rounded rectangle. I'm just going to draw a little rounded rectangle like so. I'm going to fill it in red and I'm going to turn off the outline and I'm going to say this means best seller. And again, I can just position that wherever I like. Now something else we have on here is this little thumbs up icon, and this is one of the newer features in PowerPoint. PowerPoint now has its own inbuilt icons which you can use in your presentations, and you'll find them on the Insert ribbon in the Illustrations group just here in the middle next to Shapes. So if we click on Icons, it's going to open up the PowerPoint icon library. And the icons are organized into categories. You can scroll through them, or alternatively you can search for what you're looking for in the top left hand corner. So I'm going to say thumbs up. And there we go, there is my icon. I can select it and say Insert. Now the great thing about these icons is that they're completely editable. So you'll see when I click on it, I get a graphics format ribbon, which will allow me to do things like change the color. I can resize them and they won't pixelate. I can do lots of different edits to them. So I'm going to change the fill to white. I'm going to drag it over here and I'm going to make it a lot smaller. So I'm going to hold down my Shift key and resize by dragging in those handles. And I'm just going to add it onto my bestseller shape. So you can really build up some nice little elements on your slides. So now that we've done that and we have our 4 slides representing 4 of our candles that we sell, I'm going to jump back to this title slide. Now what I want to do from here is I want to create kind of like a summary slide so people can click on certain things and jump to the specific candle. And we're going to do this utilizing one of PowerPoint's newer features, which is called Slide Zoom. Now you'll find Slide Zoom on the Insert ribbon. In the Links group, you should see a Zoom button and you have 3 different options. Now the one we're going to focus on in this session is the Slide Zoom. And it's going to ask you, what images do you want on your summary slide or your title slide? So I want my audience to be able to jump in and look at the 4 different candles from this main slide. So I'm going to say I want this one, this one, this one, and this one, and click Insert. And it basically gives me a little thumbnail view of those particular slides. And I can arrange these on my slide however I like. So I'm going to utilize my little guidelines. Can you see when you move objects around on your slide, you get these very faint guidelines which are there to help you with the positioning of your items. Now I'm going to have them like that, and I'm going to move that one underneath, and those guidelines are helping me out a lot there to know that I have them in line. And there we go. Now I want to make sure all 4 of these as a group are positioned in the center of this slide. So I'm going to select all 4. I'm going to group them together using Control G. I'm going to go up to my Shape Format ribbon, and I'm going to use my alignment tools again. So I'm going to say Align Center, and that will move them directly into the center of that slide. I'm going to ungroup them, Control Shift G, and they're now individual objects again. So these aren't just thumbnails, these are Zoom slides. So let me show you how it works. I'm going to run my slideshow, so you can utilize the slideshow icon in the status bar, or you can press the F5 key on your keyboard. And if I want to look at the Sea Salt Breeze candle, I can click on it, and I get that zoom effect. It zooms in, so it feels less like I'm moving through a PowerPoint presentation and a little bit more like an animation. Now when I click again, it moves on to the next one. Click again, it moves on to the next one. Now that's all fine in theory, but what I might want is that when I finish looking at a particular candle, I want to jump back out to this main summary page so I can then dive into another area. Now what I need to do there to make that happen is click on one of these slides, go up to my zoom ribbon, and you'll see in the first group zoom options you have a return to zoom checkbox. And I'm going to apply that to all of these zooms. So now if I run my presentation and I click on pastel tea lights, it's going to zoom in, but if I click again, it's going to bounce back out to that summary screen. And I can then choose the next one I want to look at. And once I've finished reading, I can bounce back out to that main screen. So Slide Zoom is a really nice little utility for navigation and zooming into slides. So we're building up our presentation now, and I want to move on to talking to you about, again, another newer feature in PowerPoint, and that is the morph transition. Now, in order to demonstrate the morph transition, I need to set up a slide first of all. And again, you're going to see some more techniques that you might not be aware of. So I'm going to go up to Home and I'm going to insert a new blank slide. And I'm going to add an image into the background again. So again, this is something that you've seen me do previously. But this time I'm going to utilize one of those free resources that I was talking to you before. So if you're looking for high quality images, which you are free to use in your PowerPoint presentations, then a website that's really good to note down is a website called pexels.com. And this is what it looks like. So you don't need to create an account or subscribe or anything like that. You can literally come to pexels.com and then you can search for whatever it is that you're looking for. So I'm going to say candles. And the great thing about Pexels, it gives you 578 photos in this case and 87 videos that I can use royalty free. So I'm going to scroll through all of these photos and find something that I think would be good for a background. So I'm actually going to use this one here, the pink tulip flowers with white background. Click on the image you want to use, and in the top right hand corner you'll see the big green free download button. And this is going to download that image to your downloads folder on your PC. So remember that when you jump back into PowerPoint. So now I have that downloaded, I'm going to insert it. I'm going to go to Pictures. And I'm going to go to my Downloads folder and select the picture. Now again, it doesn't quite take up all the space. So we're going to do our favorite trick, crop, fill. I'm going to drag and drag. I'm going to tell PowerPoint to fill that new space and crop. Now with this background, it is a little bit bright in certain parts, and I'm going to be putting some other images on top. So I'm going to make this background essentially transparent. And we kind of did this when we were looking at that first introduction slide. But this time I want to apply the transparency to the entire slide. Now, the way that I like to do this is by no means the only way that you can do this. A lot of people, if they want to fade this background out slightly, will go up to picture format, and there are lots of tools within corrections, color, and also transparency up here. However, I like to utilize a shape over the top because I find it gives me more control over how much of that background image is showing through. So again, I'm going to go to Insert, and I'm going to say Shapes, and I'm going to select my rectangle tool. And I'm going to draw a big rectangle over all of that image. Now remember, whatever color this rectangle is going to kind of be the tint on the background. Now I don't want it to be tinted blue. I actually want it to have a white tint to it. And again, I don't want any outline. I'm now going to right click, go to Format Shape, and again I'm going to utilize that transparency slider to let as much or as little as that picture through as I feel is necessary. So I'm going to let about that much through and close. Now what I'm going to do for this slide is I'm going to add 4 circles, and within those 4 circles I'm going to put images of all of those candles. So again, this is a nice way of learning how to perfectly position images within side shapes. So I'm going to go up to Insert, back to Shapes. I'm going to select my oval tool, and remember, to get a perfect circle, hold down Shift as you drag. Now I'm going to do it about that big, and I'm going to duplicate this circle 3 more times. So 1, 2, 3. Remember, hold down Control D to do that. I'm going to position my circles a little bit haphazardly, but making sure that they don't overlap. I'm going to select them all by holding down my Shift key. I'm going to go up to my alignment tools, and I'm going to say Align Middle and Distribute horizontally. I'm then going to group them together, Control G to make them one object. I'm going to go to Align, I'm going to align to center, and align to middle. So I now know that those are dead in the center of my slide. Control Shift G to ungroup and make them individual objects again. Now I'm going to add a title. Again, I could add a text box, but I tend to go to Home and change the layout to Title Only. And I'm going to say Candle of the Month. And I'm now going to fill each of these circles with one of the candles. And I've seen people do this in all kind of weird, wonderful ways. They'll insert the picture and then they'll attempt to crop it into a circle. There is a much better way of doing this. Click on the circle, right click, and go to Format Shape. Now in this fill group, you'll have picture or texture fill listed. So let's select that. And you'll find that it will fill it with the last image that you used. So I just need to change the picture source. I'm going to say Insert from a file, because I'm using images I already have saved off. And I'm going to select the first candle, which is Sea Salt Breeze, and Insert. Now you'll see the image is kind of squashed, so this is where we need to go back and use our old favorite crop and fill utility. So up to picture format, down to crop, fill. And then you can adjust it. So I'm going to make it a bit bigger, and I'm going to move it slightly. And once you're happy with it, click on crop to get a perfectly cropped image. I'm going to do it again for the second one. So back to fill, picture fill, insert from a file, and I'm going to say 3 wick. And again, it's a bit distorted, so we go up to crop, down to fill, and I can then move it around to get it just so. And when I'm happy, click crop. I'm going to do it one more time. Picture or texture fill, insert from a file, and I'm going to say Christmas candle, crop, fill. I'm going to make this one slightly bigger, and I'm going to move it across so it's in the middle. And I'm going to say crop. So very quickly I've been able to add those images and they look really nice within those shapes. Now the final one I'm going to do slightly differently just to show you a different technique. If you already have an image in your presentation that you want to use as a picture fill, you can do that very simply. So if I have a blank slide and I'm just very quickly going to insert the picture of the tea lights onto this slide. So if you have a slide that has an image on it already that you want to utilize as a shape fill, all you need to do is to select the image, Control C to copy it to the clipboard, jump back to your presentation, and then when we right click and go into Format Shape and Picture or Texture Fill, instead of selecting Insert, we can select Clipboard to add that picture in. And again, just to make sure, I'm going to go up to Crop and I'm going to go to Fill, and I want to move that across very slightly and click on Crop. So very quickly we've managed to fill those images into these shapes. I can now see that I also have a blue outline around these shapes, so I'm going to select them all again by holding down my Shift key, and I'm going to change that picture border to a black border. So now I've set up my slide and I don't need this one anymore, so I'm going to delete it out. So now I have this slide set up, I want to move on to talking about that morph transition. So what I essentially want to do here is I'm going to add in an image of a candle, and this candle is going to move underneath whichever one of these candles is Candle of the Month. So I'm going to jump up to Insert and I'm going to go to Online Pictures for this. And again, I'm going to search for candle. But this time I want to search for candles that have a transparent background. So I'm going to utilize the filter option in here and filter for type transparent. And I think I'm going to use this candle and click on Insert. So as you can see, this doesn't have a background, which means I don't have to crop anything out. I'm going to resize it, holding down my Shift key and pulling it down. And I'm going to put the candle down here, and you'll see as I drag across, I get that vertical line showing me that I exactly have that candle in the middle. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this slide. So I'm going to click on slide 6, press Ctrl D to duplicate the slide, and I'm going to make a change to this slide. So on this slide, I want this candle to move across underneath the Sea Salt Breeze candle because this is the candle of the month. Now I could drag it, but I'm going to use my arrow keys so that it stays in line. And I'm going to place it underneath that picture. I'm then going to duplicate this slide, so slide 7, Ctrl D to give me another copy. And what I'm going to do is that now that it's highlighted that the Sea Salt Breeze candle is Candle of the Month, we're going to really highlight this candle. So I'm going to make this a lot bigger just by dragging it out. And I'm going to move my candles slightly over to the other side. And for these other 3, I'm going to make these smaller. So I'm going to select them all, Ctrl G to group them, and I'm going to resize them all together by holding down my Shift key and then dragging them down to the bottom of the slide, remembering to ungroup once I've done that. So what I might also want to add in here is maybe a text box to write a little bit more about why this candle's been picked as Candle of the Month. Due to time restrictions, I'm not going to do that, but hopefully you get the idea. What I really want to show you is how you can utilize Morph to move through these 3 slides and the kind of effect that it gives. So I'm going to highlight these 3 slides, so slides 6, 7 and 8 by holding down my Shift key. And I'm going to go up to the Transitions ribbon and apply the Morph transition. So now when we run our slideshow, so remember F5 to do that, let's see what that looks like. So when I move to the next slide, the candle moves across, and then we get this really nice kind of animated effect. So it looks like it's less moving through a slide deck and more like it's just one linear animated movie. So that's a really, really nice little transition to remember because it makes your slides look like animations. Now moving on to the next thing I want to show you, and this is custom motion paths. And again, this is something that is quite new in PowerPoint and something I find people don't tend to utilize. So we have a very simple order process flow chart. So it says set up an account, choose your candle, choose candle holder, add to cart. And I'm going to add another little image in here. So up to insert, and we're going to go to online pictures again. And this time I'm going to search for shopping cart. And I'm going to filter for type transparent. And I'm going to select this one just here and insert that into my slide. Now obviously this is way too big, so I'm going to resize that down. I'm going to make it pretty small actually. I'm going to do it like that. I'm just going to put it just here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply some animation and also a custom motion path. So what I essentially want is for when we move between the slides, I want it to say set up an account, then I want it to fade in, choose your candle, then fade in, choose your candle holder, then fade in, add your cart. So I'm going to select this first rounded rectangle and its arrow. I'm going to go to animations and I'm going to say fade. And I'm going to do the same for the others. So I'm going to select the rounded rectangle and the arrow and fade. Select and apply, fade. And then finally I'm going to have add to cart and the shopping cart fade in. So let's see how that looks first of all. I'm going to run my slideshow, and as I click it comes up set up an account, choose your candle, choose candle holder, and then we get the add to cart. Now I want to add one more piece of animation in here. So I'm going to select the cart, and this time I'm going to go up to the animations ribbon and I'm going to select the add animation drop down and I'm going to choose a custom path. I'm going to click in the middle of this shopping cart just once. I'm going to hold down my shift key so I get a straight line, and I'm going to take this all the way off the slide and double click. So now if we play this presentation, what we have is it will move through, set up an account, choose your candle, and then we have our cart moving off the screen. Now if I want that cart to move as that add to cart process comes into play, all I need to do is select the cart and say start with previous. So again, if we play this time, and it automatically goes. So you can use custom motion paths for lots of different things, and they can really add a lot to your presentation. Now the next thing I want to speak to you about is adding video into your presentation. So I'm going to create a new blank slide again. And I'm going to jump back to that Pexels website that we were using earlier. And I'm going to type into here, party, and press enter. Now this time I'm looking for a video. So currently it's showing me photos. I'm going to click on videos and I'm going to scroll through and find a video that I think would be suitable. So I'm going to choose this one and I'm going to say free download. And again, remember that goes into your downloads folder. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to go up to insert, and in the media group at the end, I have a drop down option for video. And I'm going to say video on my PC. I'm going to go to my downloads folder and just pick up that video and insert it into my presentation. Now when you insert a video, you'll see that you get a couple of other ribbons appear, video format and playback. So format gives you lots of different ways that you can change the color and format various aspects of your video. But playback is the one I want to concentrate on because there's a couple of options in here that I want to set. Now I want this video to play as soon as I move on to the slide. So in this start area, I'm going to change this to start automatically. I'm also going to say loop until stopped because this is quite a short video and the last thing I want it to do is play for 8 seconds and then just stop dead. So I want it to carry on looping round until I press the escape key. Another option you might want to change is the volume. So if your video has talking or music and you don't want that blasting out around the room whilst you're presenting, you can mute the volume, which is what I'm going to do just here. Now what I'm also going to do is I'm going to add a half screen transparency onto my video. Now to help me with this, I'm going to turn on my guidelines. So I'm going to jump up to view, and in the show group, I'm going to turn on guides. And you can see now I get those horizontal and vertical guidelines, which means it's a lot easier for me to draw a rectangle shape that only takes up half the screen. Again, I'm going to change this color to black. I'm going to make sure I have no outline, and I'm going to do my good old favorite. I'm going to make this slightly transparent by using my transparency slider. So I'm going to have a bit of that video peeking through. I'm going to add a text box, so up to insert, across to text box. Now I'm going to make sure that my text is a color that I'm going to be able to see. So let's say white. I'm just going to say, please join us at our next launch party, and I'm going to make that text a lot bigger. And I'm going to center it like so. And just for good measure, I'm going to go back and utilize something we looked at earlier. I'm going to insert a little icon of champagne glasses. So now another little thing that we haven't looked at here is I want to change the color of these champagne glasses. So I'm going to go up to graphics format and click the drop down next to graphics fill. And you'll see at the bottom we have an eyedropper utility. So this enables you to pick up any color from your slide. So this really helps tie all of the colors in your slide together. Now I want a fairly light color, so if I hover over up here, I get a kind of tan champagne-y color. I'm going to click it, and that colors my icon in exactly the same color. So now if I play, you can see the video automatically starts. There's no volume. It's going to loop around, and we have that really nice transparency effect there. So video is a really nice way of making your slides a lot more interesting and engaging. Now the final thing I want to show you here is that looping introduction that I was talking about at the start of the session. My final 3 slides here just show some interesting facts about candles. And as I said, I might want to have these rotating around at the beginning of the session. Or if I'm at an event, I might want them looping around before the event starts. So the first thing I need to do here is move these slides to the beginning of my presentation. So to do that, I always like to jump into Slide Sorter View because it gives me a better overview of all of my slides. I'm going to select the last 3 by holding down my Shift key, and I'm going to just drag them to the front of the presentation. I'm going to jump to Normal View. And the first step of setting these up as looping slides is to do something called rehearse timings. So I need to tell PowerPoint how many seconds do I want it to spend on each slide before it moves on automatically to the next one. So I'm going to say 5 seconds for argument's sake. So I'm going to go up to slideshow, and I have a rehearse timings button. And you'll see in the top left hand corner we now have a little timer, so when it gets to 5 I'm going to manually move my slide on. We're going to wait till we get to 5 again and move on. Wait till we get to 5 again, and this time it's the last slide. I'm just going to close, and it's going to say to me, do you want to save your slide timings? So I'm going to say yes. The second part of this is to create a custom slideshow using just those slides. So I'm going to go up to Custom Slideshow, down to Custom Shows, and I'm going to say New. I'm going to call this Introduction, and I'm going to select those 3 slides that I want to include and click on OK. The final thing is to set up the slideshow. Now in here, the options that I want to make sure are checked is I want to say loop continuously until escape. So that means that when it gets to the last slide, it's going to loop back round to the first one until I press escape. And I want it to show my custom show, which I've called Introduction. and I want it to use my timing, so use timings if present, and click on OK. So now if we run our slideshow, you should see that after 5 seconds without me clicking, it's going to move on to the next slide. Like so. Let's let it run through its cycle. And on to that final slide, and because I've set it to loop round, you should find it goes back to the first slide, which it does. So to come out of here, I just need to press escape. Now, one thing to note is that if you want to come out of here and then start your actual presentation, you'll find that if you click on slide 4 and try to run your slideshow, it's just going to go back to your custom slideshow. So you need to remember, once you've finished your introduction, go back up to Setup Slideshow and switch it to Show All Slides again, and then you'll be able to run your presentation from whichever point you want. So there we go. That is the end of the webinar. Quite a few different techniques that we've utilized there. I just want to finish by pulling up some resources for you. So one of them we already looked at was pexels.com for images. Unsplash is another one that you can use for royalty-free images. And Shutterstock's always a good one if you happen to have an account, a personal account or a company account. Another site I like to use is the Noun Project, which is really good for a really wide range of icons. And then finally we have Slides Carnival, which is a great resource for templates as well. So I would definitely bookmark some of these if you're somebody who's always using images in your PowerPoint presentations and wants to find the best free resources. So that is it, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this webinar, and I hope you've picked up some useful tips and tricks that are going to make you more efficient at creating engaging PowerPoint presentations. My name's Deb, and I will see you next time.